So this morning I want to talk about avoidance, specifically emotional avoidance. And one of the things that is um, a pretty prominent feature of most of the people I used to work with, that so much of their suffering was the result of various kinds of avoidance. Um, Often in psychology we call it experiential avoidance because we're avoiding things that we have no control over, and especially like internal feelings, emotions, and so forth, and we try to push them away or distract ourselves, and the result is that they just kind of grow and grow and grow. And so, it's obvious, as we always talk about here, that we're wired to avoid discomfort. I mean, we don't like it, whether it's physical pain, emotional unease. Our instincts often lead us to seek refuge in whatever feels safe, whatever feels comforting, whatever feels pleasurable. But the problem is the tendency to avoid discomfort, especially uncomfortable emotions, hinders us from aligning with our values. We talked about that recently. Hinders us from achieving our goals, from living the life we really want to live. Because when we avoid discomfort consistently, it really begins to shrink our world. Our world really becomes too rule bound. I can't do this. If I do that, this will happen. I have to do this. I have to follow this path. And especially unnecessary rules, things that really don't matter in the big picture, but we sort of make them rules that we live by. And so from our perspective in Buddhism, this kind of avoidance is an expression of either aversion or attachment, where we either push away things we don't like, or we cling too tightly and as a security blanket almost to things that we feel give us safety or security or feel good. And aversion and attachment are two of the three poisons that the Buddha taught, greed being the other one, that cloud our mind, that perpetuate our suffering. But if we really dig in and understand the root causes of this avoidance, if we cultivate our mindfulness, we transform our relationship with discomfort and foster greater well-being. We learn to lean into discomfort. We don't see it as the enemy. The avoidance of uncomfortable emotions is often stemming from deep-seated desire to cling to what is pleasant, as I said, and push away what is unpleasant. And this is sort of the universal truth of suffering that the Buddha taught. Dissatisfaction, stress. He taught that the suffering arises from our inability to accept reality as it is. And that's usually involves impermanence. Life is marked by impermanence, yet we deny it. We pretend it doesn't exist. We cling to fleeting things, thinking they're gonna last, and then they don't. So we suffer. And this whole response, this whole avoidance response, this resistance, perpetuates our suffering. For example, if we feel anxious, sad, or angry, we may distract ourselves. We may find ways to push it away, to remove it. We may get involved with too much work. We may get involved with spending too much time online on social media or entertainment or food or other kinds of distracting activity. And we suppress these feelings. We convince ourselves that they're bad or they're unproductive. We blame external circumstances for causing us to feel that way. And yeah, these can provide temporary relief, but the problem is they ultimately prevent us, because they are a form of avoidance, from confronting the root of our suffering. While true liberation from suffering comes from not avoiding it, not suppressing it, but facing it with mindfulness, with compassion, and even with courage. I mentioned a moment ago the three poisons: greed or attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or not seeing things as they truly are. And emotional avoidance is usually closely tied to aversion, the tendency to push anything away that feels unpleasant or threatening or uncomfortable. We don't do a good job of just being with our discomfort. We think it's something we shouldn't have to experience. We think it's something that may signal that we're not coping well or whatever. But this just leads to ignorance about it. It just leads to not seeing it realistic, because avoidance often stems from a lack of understanding about our emotions and the role they play in our lives. So, for example, when we're feeling sadness or grief, it's because often we mistakenly perceive these emotions as harmful or insurmountable, not as just part of the natural flow of things. We believe that allowing ourselves to feel sadness will overwhelm us, will make us feel weak, make us feel like we're not coping. Or similarly, when we feel anxious, it's because we're unwilling to confront the uncertainty or the fear that underlies it. We don't look to see, why am I feeling anxious? Well, because I'm clinging to something that's impermanent, or I'm, attached to something that's not realistic, not going to happen, or is not going to sustain. And this ignorance prevents us from recognizing that emotions, like all phenomena, are impermanent. They're subject to change. But when we cling to ignorance, when we cling to aversion, when we cling to things that are impermanent, we only perpetuate our suffering. And the antidote to this is our mindful awareness of it, where we bring non-judgmental, that's the operative word there, non-judgmental awareness to the present moment. Whether that's our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, our reactions, whatever. We learn to observe our emotions without becoming entangled in them or becoming overly identified with them. We don't see them as a fundamental part of who we are. We see them as just another experience which we have, which arises and passes away. And this allows us to create some space for our discomfort and approaching it with curiosity rather than fear or aversion. So let's think about just a minute, again, when we get anxious, our practice would invite us to notice the physical sensations of anxiety, a tightness in the chest, or sweaty palms, or rapid breathing. Instead of labeling them as bad or unacceptable, or trying to push them away, what if we investigate the thoughts and the beliefs that accompany this anxiety? Maybe things like, oh, something bad might happen, or what if this, or I'm not good enough, or I look stupid in that situation. Over time, doing that and investigating them helps us see that emotions are not fixed or permanent. They're only temporary phenomena that arise, they change, and they fade away, just like the waves on the ocean that we talked about recently. And Thich Nhat Hanh, remember, he often compared emotions to clouds passing in the sky. He taught that we are not our emotions. We need to be careful about becoming overly identified with them. I am anxious, I am this, I am that, instead of saying anxiety is happening, sadness is happening. Oh, here comes sadness, another impermanent experience. It gives us that little bit of separation when we don't get overly identified with them. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about, we are the sky itself, vast and ever-changing, capable of holding all experiences without being defined by them. Learning to coexist with uncomfortable emotions rather than avoiding them. The default usually is to avoid them. We don't want to feel uncomfortable. The other piece of this, which is important, is some compassion for our own struggles in this area. A willingness, compassionate willingness to embrace suffering with kindness, with understanding. When we avoid uncomfortable emotions, it's because we often are judging ourselves harshly for experiencing them. The old second arrow stuff, okay? For instance, we tell ourselves that if we're having a twinge of jealousy, that it's immature, or that feeling a sense of fear is a sign of weakness. All these judgments that we put on our responses. But they only add an extra layer of shame to our emotional experience, making it even more difficult to look at objectively. But remember, the Buddha advised us to welcome all experiences, especially the ones we don't like. Treating ourselves with the same kindness and care that we would offer a friend. When we encounter uncomfortable emotions, We can remind ourselves that it's completely natural to feel this way. All of us experience similar struggles. We're not uniquely defective because we're experiencing it. And this helps dissolve some of the barriers of shame and self-judgment that often accompany our unpleasant emotions. It helps us create a safe space to explore them without aversion. Avoiding uncomfortable emotions prevents us from acting in alignment with our values and living the life we want. It shrinks our world. It stops us from following the ethical principles that are part of our path. Right intention, right action, right livelihood specifically, which encourage us to live with integrity, with kindness, with mindfulness. When we avoid our emotions, we risk acting out of alignment with these values. If we avoid feelings, for example, of guilt or regret, we may end up not taking responsibility for our actions, not making amends when necessary. We offload them, we push them away. We don't say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm not a terrible person, but I can make amends. Likewise, if we avoid feelings of fear or vulnerability that we talked about recently, we may hold back from pursuing meaningful goals or building more authentic connections in relationships. By facing our emotions with mindfulness and compassion, we respond to them in ways that reflect our values. So instead of lashing out in anger, for instance, we pause and we reflect on how to communicate our needs with kindness and clarity. Or instead of withdrawing in fear, we take small, courageous steps toward that which we're avoiding. This way, emotional awareness becomes a foundation for living a life of purpose and fulfillment. So what are some practical steps to do this? The first one is acknowledging and naming our emotions. Okay, give them a name. Oh, I'm feeling sadness. I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling frustration. Bring them into conscious awareness. Too often we don't do that, and we just react reflexively without really identifying what's causing that reaction. We use mindfulness, such as focusing on our breath or doing a quick body scan, to observe what's arising without judgment. We notice when the emotion is manifesting in our body and how it changes over time. And then we look at the root causes. What are my thoughts, beliefs, experiences that are contributing? What am I feeling right now? What might this emotion be trying to signal me? What might it be trying to show me? And then we bring our self-compassion to it. It's reminding ourselves it's not a defect to feel uncomfortable. It's perfectly normal to feel uncomfortable. All emotions, even the unpleasant ones, are a natural part of the human experience. We offer kindness to ourselves when we're doing that, not harsh judgment, which is usually the default. And then when we're ready, we consider how we want to respond to our emotions in a way that reflects our values and supports our well-being. And maybe this involves setting boundaries with people that are encroaching on us in an unhealthy way, seeking support, taking steps toward a meaningful goal. But remembering that avoiding emotions is a natural human tendency, and we have to kind of push back against that. Because if we don't, it's going to prevent us from living fully and authentically. Remembering that all emotional avoidance is rooted in aversion and ignorance, which only perpetuates suffering. When we can cultivate compassion and mindfulness, we transform our relationship with discomfort. We face our emotions, the negative ones, with courage and equanimity. And we create conditions for greater self-awareness and more ethical living and overall well-being. We discover that true freedom does not lie in avoiding them, but in embracing them with an open heart and a clear mind. So those are some thoughts on emotional avoidance this morning.